Alrighty. So, of course, in the depths with the Mind Flayer colony, as a party ventures in, they will eventually encounter the ruler of that colony, the gigantic brain that all Mind Flayer serves as its will. This week we're continuing our series on illithids. We're finally to the big guy, the leader of the Mind Flayer colony, the Elder Brain. And we're finally into some creatures that you get to throw at your heavy-hitting players. I'm your GM, Isaiah, and this is Game Master's Arsenal. Now, the Elder Brain, we don't actually have its true name. And that's just the fact. We don't have its true name. Elder Brain is just what non-illithids call it because it's a central hub. Now, it is an Ulitharid transformed into an Elder Brain. Now, when an Elder Brain turns itself in, it becomes the leader of the colony. Every other Mind Flayer around it serves as an extension of its will. And each Elder Brain is different because they do have unique personalities, but they do store lifetimes of information. So as you're kind of creating this, you got to understand most dungeons with an Elder Brain involved will be carved out around the Elder Brain because colonies will defend the Elder Brain to the last. Because if an Elder Brain dies, the colony is effectively dead because it's the Elder Brain that lays the tadpole. They serve such an important role in the Mind Flayer life cycle, and because of that, the many colonies around, I'm actually going to pull up, there is a picture of a colony here. Colonies are all built with the Elder Brain's comfort and its ability to reproduce in mind. Most of them, it's going to be at the center. It's going to be in the defensive area. If you're hearing things in the background now, that's unavoidable. There's some construction going on outside. It's been going on for a minute. We can't help it. But back to the Mind Flayers and the Elder Brain. This guy is a boss. This guy is the boss. And he knows the party is coming. If the party has felled Mind Flayers around the colony, this guy knows they're coming. You're not sneaking up on an Elder Brain, especially because of its telepathic connections. Now, I'm going to get right into its abilities, because at least some of its abilities, because it has layer actions and it has regional effects. We're dealing with a CR14 creature that your players are going to have to deal with. Now, its regional effects. First of all, everything within 5 miles to it, feel paranoid, as if somebody is following them and somebody is watching them. Now, because of that, you can play that in a couple different ways as a GM. You can just make it in the dark. They think they see something. They think they hear something. They think that they're in danger. And as a DM, you can be like, okay, well, make a perception check. Behind you, you think you hear the footsteps of creatures shuffling about. Or you don't notice anything. That is the scariest thing. Roll perception. 18? You don't notice anything. As simple as that. You can make the players paranoid and the characters paranoid by extension. Sometimes just making an odd roll will put your players on edge. This is the time when you can feed into the out-of-game experiences that make players paranoid. And feeding into that helps the fact that they're supposed to be paranoid in-game, because they will start behaving as if they're paranoid in-game, which is always a lot of fun. Now, the other regional effect is that it psychic whispers. Any creature with which the Elder Brain has formed a psychic connection. I'm going to talk about that, because this thing has psychic link, which is an action. It targets an incapacitated creature. Until the link ends, the Elder Brain can perceive everything the target senses. It becomes aware that the target becomes aware that something is linked to its mind once it is no longer incapacitated, and it can terminate the link at any time. Although the creature due to its actions, the creature is not able to discern the nature of the mind flayer, the elder brain, from the psychic link alone. And this thing can form psychic links normally within like 120 feet. But remember, Ulitharids can act as psychic hubs. So if an Ulitharid is following them, this is why we covered Ulitharids before, you can have them perform essentially turn the elder brain's range of 120 feet into 5 miles. Now it can just target the links. Now it can just form the link with the creatures. The other effect is, of course, the psychic links. They hear faint, incomprehensible whispers in the deepest recesses of their mind. These are stray thoughts of the elder brain. As it starts thinking, the link causes the mind of its target to kind of meld with it a little bit, and so these are just stray thoughts of the elder brain. And so you can play that out. You're like, make a perception check. Okay, you hear this whisper in the dark. You hear it say this. And it's like, okay, that doesn't make any sense to me. Because incomprehensible doesn't necessarily mean that they cannot understand the words. Maybe it's talking in Illithid, and so the players don't understand it. Maybe it's talking in Deep Common, so the player doesn't understand it. Of course, he's going, why is something talking in a different language in my head? That is an option, although I think if you did it in Common, that would be more interesting. And incomprehensible doesn't mean they don't necessarily know it, but they don't understand it. If they don't understand what the thoughts are, and they're just straight random thoughts, that's like, okay, why? What? It doesn't make any sense to the player, which is fine because that means it doesn't make any sense to the character. I don't often try to I don't recommend co-mingling the out of character experience with the in-character experience, but it can help to set the tone for players. And like I said, I don't recommend doing it for every creature. I don't recommend doing it very often at all. But in this case, the atmosphere that you create for your game will help to influence the character's thoughts and feelings. You're essentially trying to hack the paranoia in through creepy ambiance, random rolls, incomprehensible thoughts. Of course, then it also has telepathic eavesdropping as its other regional effect. It can overhear any telepathic conversation within 5 miles of it. The creature that initiated the conversation makes a DC 18 Wisdom saving throw when it's first established. If the save is successful, the creature is aware that something is eavesdropping. So essentially, if one of your players has psychic links for some reason, whether they're playing a psychic-based sorcerer or they're playing a dragon with the psychic abilities, or they took a feat to get psychic abilities, as soon as they make a psychic link, not a link necessarily, but start a psychic conversation, the Elder Brain can listen in, which is really cool. Because when they start thinking things are watching them, when they start thinking things are studying them, your players will try to switch to a form of communication which the creature may not understand. They will turn to telepathy if they are able to, which means odds are what they're going to do is, well, they're going to turn to that telepathy, and that just invites the Elder Brain in. Of course, when the Elder Brain dies, all these effects end. These are just the regional effects. These are things that you can do to set up the fight with the Elder Brain. They're going into the colony. This is the stuff they're experiencing as they're getting closer to the colony and as they're entering the colony. Assuming, of course, the colony has an Elder Brain, which it will. Now, of course, we got to talk about its story implications. The Elder Brain is the big bad. He's CR14. He's going to be the big bad of a lot of your stories. Because of this, the fight will be set up. They'll be hunting this thing for a long time. And it's one of those, we finally found the colony. We finally found the Elder Brain colony. It's time to wipe it out. And they will wipe it out. They will happily wipe it out. And then they go in big, and this is going to be your big end dungeon. They're going to go in. They're going to explore. I set this up, and we're going to talk about building your colony later. Because when you build your colony, you got to understand that it's defensive and offensive. The Elder Brain has a plan. It is trying to enact the grand design. So we'll talk about building the colony. We will be doing a colony build next week. teaching you guys how to run this dungeon, how to build this dungeon, and how you might put the different types of mind flayers in, which is always really fun. Now, back to the Elder Brain. The Elder Brain is going to defend itself. It's going to put everything in the way. So as this guy's the big bad, it's ordering the mind flayers to attack. It's studying the party as they're getting closer, trying to figure out to kill them. The fights may not get more difficult because they are different creatures. You might have some intellect devours. That can be killed very easily. You might have base mind flayers, which won't be felled easily, but can be felled pretty easily because they're low health, depending on initiative rolls. But the entire time, the Elder Brain is studying the creatures. So the fights get harder because the Elder Brain is studying them. Once the Elder Brain knows how to beat them, maybe it invites them and says, oh, well, I can prove that I'm better than you. Even worse, the Elder Brain may decide that the players don't. It doesn't want it doesn't want them dead. Maybe it decides they would be better off as thralls of the colony or as mind flayers. This adds a double threat where they may not be trying to kill the players. They don't need them dead. Maybe they want them in the colony. Maybe it's realized, oh man, these could be very powerful servants for me. And it's studying them, which means when the party inevitably enters the battle with the Elder Brain, it is going to know how to fight them. It will know how to fight them. It will know how to kill them. It'll probably know their classes because it'll have seen them fight through the eyes of other mind flayers. It'll see their classes. It'll see how they fight, their strategies, and it can be conducting a tactical decision before the fight comes in. You know, they're like, okay, we come in. Well, their mage is only on the back line. Okay, well, I've hit a mind flayer in one of those pods outside. Did the perception check? No, notice it. Okay, well, the mind flayer will be entering the fight on the side of the Elder Brain before the fight, as the fight starts. Now you're surrounded. It is going to make very tactical decisions, and that's because of its stats. Now, the Elder Brain is a hyper-intelligent creature with an intelligence of 21, wisdom of 19, and a charisma of 24. This thing is strong. This thing is, based on CR, based on stats, other than the fact that this thing doesn't have the best spell casting, based on the fact that it doesn't have the best spell casting, just because, oddly enough, you're gonna read this because I'm taking this right off of it. It says it's supposed to have spells, but I roll 20. I cannot find anywhere where this thing has spells. Yeah, sorry, back to the stats. It's just throwing me for a second because it says it's supposed to have spells. And maybe that's your decision that it has spells. Maybe it knows a few spells. Its experience is determined based on everything it's eaten. But plus 10 to intelligence, plus 9 to wisdom, plus 12 to charisma saving throws. This thing's not striking too hard with it like normally, but it is a fighter. Heavy saving throws. On the 3 saving throws that probably matter the most. It's not going to save it from a fireball, but it's going to cause it. But any wisdom, intelligence, charisma saving throws probably going to fail, especially if it's a charisma saving throw. Plus 12 to charisma? That is crazy. It knows Arcana, Deception, Insight, Intimidation, Persuasion, which means maybe the party is being convinced that this isn't an Elder Brain in the first place. There's so much that this thing can do before the fight even starts that you're going to be putting the players on the back foot. The back foot. Every time an Elder Brain comes in, your players are going to feel like they're up against the wall, which is what you want. It understands Common, Deep Speech, and Undercommon, but can't speak. But it has telepathy of 5 miles, so it's going to speak telepathically. Like I said, it has psionics. Elder Brain can cast the following spells, although it doesn't state it has spells, which is confusing to me. Why it states that it has spells, but it doesn't. I think it's because some of its psionic abilities are considered spells, but this shouldn't stop you from giving this thing spells. Specifically spells that would aid in its battle. Creature sense, it is aware of everything with intelligence 4 within 5 miles, unless protected by a not mind blank spell or similar magic. It can't be perceived in this manner, which means if your party knows they're going up, they might grab a ring of mind shielding. As a DM, you might give one of them a ring of mind shielding. That would give them the opportunity to attack. I don't recommend giving them all rings of mind shielding. As blindsight of 120 feet, so as soon as they're within 120 feet of this thing, it knows they're there. It may not know the class or anything. It'll have seen them through their mind flayer's eyes. We're back to the construction again. It'll see them through the mind flayer's eyes, but it may not know everything about them. Now, that does mean that this 5 miles is a long distance in D&D. Now, it's not going to be casting spells that far, but it's going to be trying to lure them away, or lure them into a trap. That's its creature sense. It has legendary resistances, which are amazing. We're in the point where creatures have met legendary resistances. If it fails to save, it can choose to succeed instead. It can do this 3 times a day. Your players are gonna suffer through that if they're not playing smart, because it's like, I'm gonna do this. Okay, I choose to succeed the roll. I roll. Oh, I fail. Well, I'm gonna use my legendary resistance. Choose to succeed. Then it has magic resistance, so it has advantage on saving throws against spells and magic. So this thing is, with its plus 10 to those saving throws, this thing's not failing saving throws, because if they're throwing a wisdom saving throw at it, it's rolling its wisdom save plus 10 at advantage. You're not going to fail that. It's going to be very hard to fail that kind of thing. So this Elder Brain's going to succeed most of the time. Of course, it's also a telepathic hub, which means it can talk with 10 creatures. It can talk with 10 creatures at a time. Now, here's the stuff that matters for battle, because that's all its base abilities. That you kind of understand what it's about with those. Excuse me. Now, its actual attacks. Now, it has a tentacle attack, which is plus 7 to hit, 30-foot range. Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on. Tentacle attack, plus 7 to hit, 4d8 plus 2 bludgeoning. If it's huge or smaller, it is automatically grappled, and takes 1d8 plus 5 at the start of each of its turn until the grapple ends. It can have 4 targets grappled at a time. It's got 4 tendrils just to be swinging. Now, it does not have multi-attack, which means this thing's not grappling multiple creatures at a time, other than the fact that it does have legendary actions. Because it has legendary actions, and one of them being a tentacle attack, it can grapple up to 4 creatures. Now, you have to be aware of that, because that takes 2 of its legendary actions. You know how it is. But this tentacle attack is its base attack. It's probably going to take somebody who needs somatic components out of the fight. It's probably going to be used to get the fighter where it wants it. This is more of a crowd control thing than anything, because its real damage is going to come from its spells, whatever spells you give it. And, of course, it's Mind Blast. Looking at this thing, unfortunately, this thing, for level 14, will not do that much damage on its own. With the Mind Blast, creatures within 60 feet. Now, this is interesting. Mind Blast. Creatures of the Elder Brain's choice within 60 feet of it. Unlike the Mind Blast of Mind Flayers, which is like a cone attack, I believe. I'm pretty sure. Let me pull up the Mind Flayer. I have old GMA stuff laying around. No, not you. Mind Blasts. Whereas the Mind Blast of other Mind Flayers are in a cone, I just confirmed that. Sometimes, you know how it is. I want to make sure. Whereas the others are a cone, this one just cares if they're at 60 foot. This just has a range on the Mind Blast, which means it's going to hit most people. Anything within 60 feet of it can be hit. 5d10 psychic damage and be stunned for 1 minute, can repeat the save at the end of its turn. This is a DC 18 intelligence saving throw. That is a hard intelligence save to make. Your wizard's probably going to make it, but everyone else is probably going to fail, which means it's tying down rounds as a whole with its Mind Blast. And it's a cone. It's not a cone. It just chooses what creatures it wants to Mind Blast, which means, yeah, this thing could easily take the party out just by Mind Blasting them multiple times in a row if you roll that 1/3 odds. Pretty simple as far as it goes. Elder Brain's got 3 legendary actions. It can target one creature within 120 feet of it, which it has a psychic link. This is where establishing that psychic link comes into play. This Elder Brain will want to be establishing that psychic link during long rests when the party are asleep and incapacitated. It wants to be establishing that link early so that when the fight inevitably comes, it can use it to its advantage. Of course, when you're stunned, you're incapacitated as well, which means it can form that psychic link as a bonus action on the stunned people. It can break concentration. Targets a creature that has a psychic link and just ends their concentration. They take 1d4 psychic damage per level of the spell as well, which doesn't sound like a lot, but you're at level 14. You may have a level 6 spell up, and that's 64 damage that you're taking on top of losing your concentration on your spell. Do you know how rough that is? Lose concentration on your spell, and you're done. You take that much damage. The effect that you were counting on is over. It puts your players once again on the back foot. They realize, oh crap, this plan might not work because this is a legendary action. He casts the spell, and the thing goes, legendary action, break concentration. And it's like, oh crap, what if he cast haste? Oh crap, the fighter's out of the fight for a turn. Psychic Pulse targets one creature within 120 foot that has a psychic link. The target and enemies of the Elder Brain within 30 feet of it. This is just another AoE target effect. Take 3d6 psychic damage. Of course, then it can sever the psychic link at any point. I don't know why it would want to sever the psychic link as a legendary action, but it causes the creature to have disadvantage on all ability check, attack rolls, and saving throws. Which means it can be like, oh, the fighter's coming at me. I don't want to deal with that thing. Break the link. You have disadvantage on your attacks. All ability and saving throws. So if it's planning on mind blasting, on its turn, it might sever the link to a few creatures and then mind blast them because now they have disadvantage on that saving throw. Now, an Elder Brain can fight alone. I've talked about this. This is just the stat spread that you're looking at. It has just a host of abilities, being as strong as it is. So as far as the Elder Brain going in the actual fight, this is going to be a rough fight for your players. This is going to be the end boss, which means you are not pulling punches. You are not... I recommend when you're building its spell list, don't give it too many super strong spells. I'll kind of keep its spells on par with the other Mind Flayers. Kind of keep the theme of the Mind Flayers having crowd control and... illusion effects. That's what I recommend. Give them some ranged damage spells, just for the heck of it. Not too many. Don't give them like fireball and that, but give them some at least one ranged damage spell that's like, okay, well, I don't want to attack, or they're all out of range. I might as well throw a firebolt. But this also comes into play where this thing is going to be calling for reinforcements. If it is in danger, it will be summoning the full force of the colony to help it. So what I would recommend doing, I do this with my party sometimes, setting a timer, a round timer. Say, okay, at round 3, another Mind Flayer shows up. At round 5, a Mind Flayer shows up. If it's getting too difficult for your players, you don't need to do that. Or if you feel like your players won't be a match if the fight keeps turning. But any Mind Flayers they do not kill will be brought to the Elder Brain's aid. So what I'd recommend doing, and when we build our dungeon next week, I'll show you guys how I do this. I recommend establishing each room with a certain amount of Mind Flayers, and of course, how many rounds it would take to get to the Elder Brain. because it's like, okay, if this room, it only takes one round to get to the Elder Brain. The Elder Brain starts the emergency call is essentially immediately sent out as soon as the fight starts. The Elder Brain realizes it's in danger. It sends out an emergency call. Maybe it doesn't realize it's in danger when the fight initially starts. Maybe it's like, okay, well, these guys aren't a threat. But then somebody hits it for 50, and it's like, oh, I'm in trouble. Okay, send the emergency call. Beginning of the round, these Elder Brains are now these Mind Flayers are now in the fight. Oh, this room will take 3 turns for them to get there. Okay, well, they're going to be in the fight after that. And then the colony, the reason I do it that way, and the reason why I recommend establishing your rooms with the numbers, is because if your players go through the colony and murder everything, it doesn't have help. It can't call on any help. But say they just bulldoze right to the Elder Brain. Well, now there's all the monsters in the colony. The colony would come and help the Elder Brain. The difficulty comes in this thing never has to fight alone. The Elder Brain is the center of the colony. It doesn't have to fight alone. It will not fight alone. And if it doesn't have to, which means it will be summoning its Olatharids. It's going to be summoning its Mind Flayers. It could be that it summoned them before the fight. When the fight started, they knew they were coming, and the Olatharid, the Olatharids and the Olatharid and a couple of its Mind Flayers in the colony formed ranks with this thing. This fight is going to be difficult. Now, I also want to dispel this kind of myth here with since we're kind of at the end of talking about the Elder Brain and what you can do with it, because it's more of the big bad threat. It's the guy pulling the strings. I want to discuss Baldur's Gate 3 and how they handle the Elder Brain. I do not like how they handle the Elder Brain in Baldur's Gate 3. Sure, it's like it's an enslaved Elder Brain. That thing is humongous. The Elder Brain is a large aberration, 10 foot by 10 foot. It is not as big as they make it look. They make that thing look absolutely gigantic, and it's not. Honestly, Baldur's Gate 3 took some creative license with the Elder Brain, and I'm like, I don't know how I feel about that. I like that it made an interesting story. I don't like how they handled the Elder Brain, because an Elder Brain itself is just such a deep threat. And they realized, well, it's CR14, the Elder Brain could be the final boss, and they let it be the final boss. But I'm like, you made an interesting story. It's great, but I don't agree with the liberties you took with the Elder Brain. Try not to pull a Baldur's Gate 3 with the Elder Brain. Don't imprison it. You don't need to imprison an Elder Brain to make it interesting. The Elder Brain is terrifying on its own. Understanding that you are up against an Elder Brain should be scary enough, because it might mean death, but it might be a fate worse than death. Your players are going up against a fate worse than death because they're going up against potentially Ceramorphosis. And on that note, that's everything that we've got to cover for you today. I'm your GM Isaiah. Next week we'll be building a dungeon, and the week after we'll be talking about what happens when a Mind Flayer colony is destroyed. We'll see you next time.